Hey, what's up? It's Zach, and what I'm going to be doing right now is talking about a movie, specifically the greatest movie experience I've ever had in my life. It's a movie review of sorts, if you will, and I definitely will. So let's get into it. The 2005 theatrical release of Batman Begins, starring Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne, directed by Christopher Nolan, is the greatest movie-going experience I've ever had in my life. And here's why. There's a reason. There's actually a number of factors that play into this. To begin with, factor number one, I was a most receptive audience. As long as I can remember, and some of my earliest memories, when I look back, they involve this character, the Batman. And some of my very earliest memories are my father telling bedtime stories to my brothers and I. And this was the subject of the stories, the Batman. And from a young age, I was captivated, transfixed, compelled by the character, and really latched onto it. But yeah, started really early. Bedtime stories, Batman versus the Joker, Batman versus the Riddler, and many other stories such as that. So I had early exposure to the idea. And this continued on. The next thing was watching the 1960s TV series starring Adam West, Batman, when it was in reruns on TV. And, I found myself always gravitating towards a live action portrayal of Batman, of the Batman. And this continued. I never really dove into the comic books as much as others. I never really dove into the animated stuff as other people. And I did some of the toys, I had some action figures when I was a kid. But it was always the live action portrayal of this character that was really most fascinating to me. So, this continued on, and in 1989, this took a gigantic leap when Tim Burton directed a Batman movie that was different than other ones before, in that it was, I guess you could say, much darker. The Gotham City thing was this twisted, scary version of New York City or something like that. And Batman was dressed in all black in the Batsuit. He was mysterious. He was a little bit more broody. The Joker was downright creepy. The villain he faced in the movie, played by Jack Nicholson. And this darker portrayal of Batman just, honestly, it blew my mind. It blew the brain right out the back of my skull. And I loved it, and I was all in on it. And movies kept getting released. This was obviously a profitable thing. And the movies became a little bit more goofy throughout the 90s. And then dropped off around, I think, 1997 with a really silly, preposterous Batman movie that involved a lot of kind of weird costume stuff and kind of campy villains. Anyway, it didn't matter. I still loved it. I didn't even discriminate. But this was just something that I loved this content and I couldn't get enough of it. So, another major factor of what makes this movie so great for me is that the cast and crew could not have been more perfect. Christopher Nolan is a director. And I don't know if you're familiar with Christopher Nolan's work, but I didn't even know him by name. I just watched some of his movies in the 2000s, early 2000s, maybe late 1990s. That blew my mind. The storytelling was so tight. It was so creative. Every scene, every moment built upon the one before it. And it was always tied together in an amazing plot twist and huge, amazing ending of the movie. So, that's the director of this movie, of Batman Begins in 2000, that got released in 2005. And let's look at the cast. There's Christian Bale. Christian Bale is Bruce Wayne. He was cast as Bruce Wayne, but there's no one that I've ever seen that looks more like Bruce Wayne than Christian Bale. It was seriously a perfect match. And think about who else is in this movie. Katie Holmes. These are supporting actors now. Katie Holmes. Cillian Murphy. Liam Neeson. Michael Caine. And Morgan Freeman. These are supporting actors, mind you. So, these are actors who are, tentpole franchise carrying heft and star power and celebrity and talent. And they're rolling 3, 4, 5, 6 ranks deep on how much dialogue they have as a supporting cast member. Amazing cast of the movie. Also, this Batman movie, this 2005 Batman Begins, was far more visually immersive than any one that had been made up to it. And they've been making Batman movies for a long time. As early as 1943, I believe. And more than half dozen had been made at this point, maybe closer to 10, before the 2005 Batman Begins that is my favorite, that I'm talking about. But this one was different in visually, it was more immersive. This movie had, I guess movie making in general had really sped up and really made great improvements to where things just look better. There's better technology. There was better tools available to the director to tell a story. And also, this particular director, Christopher Nolan, he has a thing where he's really known for what are called practical effects. Just means that it's they're effects in the movie that aren't made by a computer, or they're not digital. We've all seen odd-looking, shiny, too smooth objects or effects in a movie that just don't look real. It's because it was a bad version of what's called a special effect or digital effect. So Christopher Nolan, this director, he shies away from it. He shies away from the digital effects unless it's totally necessary, I guess, to get the job done. And what results is something that just looks a little bit more real, a little bit more convincing. And I guess you could say a little bit more immersive. So, and also, there were some digital effects in this movie. And I guess this director just used restraint. He had a really vigorous, intense screening process before hiring out a studio to make, to do for digital effects. And like, for example, he found someone that could make, bats, because there were hundreds, thousands of bats needed for some of the scenes, that could make them look real. And he wouldn't sign off on it, wouldn't approve it until it looked real. And it did look real. It was pretty amazing. It was just the most visually appealing version of this I'd ever seen before. Another big factor is the way the storytelling that's involved in this particular movie. For one, this is the first time that a Batman story has been so grounded in reality, or you could say tethered to plausible reality. When questions are asked about Batman in this time, with this movie, there's an answer that is plausible. It may not be true in the current physical universe as we know it, but it totally could be. For example, where did Batman learn to fight? Well, turns out he trained in the high mountains of Asia with the most elite martial arts squad, secret underground ninjas. They trained him. So maybe those guys aren't around in reality, but as you can imagine, they could be. It's possible. You know, why is Alfred so useful and helpful to the Batman when he's a butler? Well, turns out in this Batman universe, Alfred's like a ex-special forces soldier or mercenary or something like that who just happens to be a butler. And you could ask, what else? Where does Batman get all this tech? Where does he get all the amazing technology? Well, in this movie, there's an explanation. It's because his company, Wayne Enterprises, has an entire division of R&D, research they do for the Defense Department. So they're stacked with weapons, tech, anything you need to get any job done imaginable. So it's just more realistic, or at least more plausible. And the next aspect of the storytelling that connected with me was that it was dark. Gotham City had never looked scarier. Batman had never looked as menacing. The villain he faced was terrifying. He's called Scarecrow. Freaking terrifying. It was all more brooding. It was all much more drama over comedy, with exceptions, but the tone was dark. And for me, I totally believe that this character is best in its glory. The Batman is most in his glory in a less comedic setting. And the real secret sauce that, in my opinion, made this so great was this was the first time that someone had told a story that was what people call an origin story. And what I mean by that is every other movie on this subject that had been made, we see the Batman already full-blown into his life as the hero, the crime fighter, the Batman. We meet him when he's already full-on into that thing. But not this time. And this is what makes it different. In my opinion, this is what makes the story different than any other story of any of these movies that had ever been made before this. So, and I think, so we see Bruce Wayne of all his life stages, from a young child in his social world and his losing his parents, as we all know, it's part of the legend and story. We see him as adolescent, angry, brilliant but angry, student at Princeton but gets kicked out of Princeton, and just mad at the world, just angry and disturbed inside. We see him as a young 20-something who's willing to throw it all away to try and kill somebody to get some revenge for what happened to his family. We see the interventions by the people in his life, by Alfred at different points, and by the character is called Rachel Dawes, his like friend and love interest. And we eventually see him, I guess we see like the rise, fall, and then redemption of Bruce Wayne through just a really intense story. And what this does, which wasn't done before, is it makes the character of Batman relatable. It makes Batman relatable. Batman was never relatable before. And this added a powerful kind of feeling of human element to the story, where the character's more rounded out and just has a lot more nuance and, I think, compelling journey. So as you can see, I've thought about this. This is my favorite. And there was, when I watched the movie in 2005, something happened that was, I guess you could say, it was kind of a miracle for me. Because during this time, in my early 20s, I was starting to deal with kind of onset of some mental health issues and symptoms. And I can look back and see it was there the whole time of my childhood and my youth. But in my early 20s, the symptoms really started to hit hard and escalate. And there were a lot of times, especially during this period of my life, around 2005 and the several years after, where I was just burdened. I spent a lot of days just with a head full of dark, unpleasant thoughts that I could not shake. And I didn't have the words to even talk about it. I felt the stigma of, oh my God, if I admit that I'm not feeling fantastic, then, well, the people around me don't really have a nice way of talking about that when that happens to people. Stigma. And I felt it. I put it on myself and feared it. I'd never been exposed to, I guess you could say, our coping skills, how to process this kind of stuff. And I was, I had a hard time. And I just couldn't stop. I couldn't stop thinking about things that were that I had huge fear responses to. Couldn't stop thinking about things that were really dark. Couldn't stop trying to spin my wheels in my head and use all my energy trying to figure out something that felt like it was just plaguing me. And I could not shake it with the limited, this much amount of knowledge that I had about those things at the time. And I just remember during that time, just it going on and on and on and on, day in and day out. It was not fun. And when I watched this movie, when I sat down in 2005, early 20s me, and watched this movie, what happened was I got completely, all these things that I've mentioned up until this point, all combined in the perfect storm for me of an excellent, unforgettable story. And it was pretty intense. I guess what I would call it is I was totally sucked in. I was totally transported. I was, not to sound too dramatic, but I kind of totally merged into the story, into the universe of that world. And, people that use psychedelic drugs will talk about, they call it eco-death. It means that it's something like the person of me, as I consider myself as an individual, dissolves into something else and experiences something so fully. It would have been unimaginable before. And that's, that's dramatic, but I had an experience that I was so pulled in to this story that I forgot everything. I forgot about time. I forgot about my surroundings. I forgot to think for the 2 or so hours that this movie went on. And I just remember walking out of the theater very vividly. And I had a realization that I'd forgotten about everything. I forgot about it all for those 2 hours. And I felt free. I felt free from it. And I don't know how to properly communicate. That was a great gift to me at a time when I didn't believe it was possible or know how to do it. And it gave me some hope. It gave me some hope to have an experience where something that hurt so much that I didn't think I would ever feel like I could ever get some space from or some fresh air to breathe from, I found it in that theater that day, and have gone on to, very fortunately, grow in many ways, get help from a lot of people, tools, skills, changing my relationship to my own thoughts, and many other such things as that. And I have way better of a chance to process those things and those feelings when they hit. It's kind of a big part of my life journey. But the experience I had was so profound. And honestly, it was kind of a miracle. It's kind of a miracle how it made me feel. So, Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, and everybody that worked on that film, I'll kind of always have I'll kind of be forever grateful for what you did. Because it kind of worked a little miracle for me. So, as you now can see, this is why Batman Begins is the greatest movie experience I've ever had in my life. Cool. Much love. Peace. Talk soon.